I think of that and I think of what Jesus said to his disciples. Let not your hearts be troubled. Let not your hearts be troubled. In our own lives we have troubles. Of course, one of the great philosophers, whose name escapes me now, answered, when asked about troubles, he said, trouble? Life is trouble. Only death is no trouble. And we've all experienced that, and we know it to be true. And I think there are also differences between troubles and the troubled heart that Jesus talks about. Let not your hearts be troubled. Because certainly we're always going to have troubles, always going to have worries and concerns and conflicts. I noticed there were couples fighting in Cancun. What'd you bring that down here for? We don't need that. That isn't what I ordered. People waiting on you hand and foot down there, you know. It's kind of amazing. I didn't order that. Send that right back. It's kind of disgusting, actually, a little bit. Well, there are those kinds of worries and concerns and conflicts that we all have, which need resolution, and they need our concern, and they need to be finished off or taken care of, whatever. And then there's a troubled heart, which is a very different thing. The troubled heart that Jesus talks about is much deeper, like the feeling of unlovability. Now, maybe you've never had that, but you've known others who've had it. You've experienced that in some people. You know them a little bit and you think, it doesn't seem like they think that they're lovable or that it's possible that others could love them. In my work with children, I often find that to be true. Children who have been badly abused believe that they deserve it because they are unlovable. And there are those who are so depressed that they are, in definition, lost. They don't know what to do or where to go or how to get out of that depression. And so we could say that they are lost. And there are those who are lost in isolation, like Annie Sullivan. And quite often when people have terrible problems and they can't solve them and they're not sure what to do, they choose isolation, to run away from the world and from other people who don't seem to be able to help them or care about them. And then the isolation just magnifies the problem. There are people who feel abandoned by life itself. I remember when one 14-year-old girl said to me, "There is no place in this world for me." 14 years old. And there are those of us, many times in the deepness of our hearts, have suffered from what we could call unforgivability. I have done something that is so bad, I don't think I can be forgiven. Or someone has done something so bad to me that I cannot forgive that person. And that unforgivability creates a pain in our heart of hearts that never goes away. This is what I would refer to as a soul distress. And when anyone has a soul distress, it covers and colors everything in their lives. We all have it at some time. And when we are very fortunate, and when we are surrounded by people who love us, we can get through that and move on. Troubles we all have. A troubled heart and soul is much deeper. And Jesus, of course, addresses only the deep stuff, not the superficial stuff. One of the reasons why I think they had to get rid of him, the religious authorities, was because he wouldn't be superficial. He wouldn't stay on the surface. He wouldn't gloss things over. He wouldn't look the other way. He wanted to be after the deep things always in life. Anne Sullivan was lost. Can you conjure up a picture of a little girl in a dungeon? A little girl living day after day in a cage? Because that's the way people thought she needed to be treated. We can't even imagine that today, although in some parts of the world that still exists, we know that. But this little girl, we were told, was untouchable. She had a soul disease that left her hopeless. I wonder if anyone believed that little Annie even had a soul. Maybe they thought that the mental distress had taken her soul away, and therefore not even God remembered who she was. But then the nurse arrives. And the nurse, for me, in this story is a symbol of an untroubled heart. Certainly she has troubles. But in her heart, she felt that there was hope for each one of God's children. Oh, she had seen trouble working in a mental institution, working in a place where people had lost themselves somehow, who knows how. She had seen a lot of trouble, and she'd had her own, I'm sure. But her faith somehow made her heart and soul believe there were possibilities above anything that even seemed reasonable. That there was a power that was possible in a person's life and a strength placed there by God that could somehow be brought to bear on their problems. Somehow she believed that God could bring change, and that was all she needed to believe. The brownies formed a bridge. Such a simple thing. A symbol of the unresistibleness, I would hope, of God. Can you resist a brownie? Some of you I know have to resist brownies. Some of you should resist brownies, including me. But I can't resist them. Let's not get started on brownies because we'll be at it for a long time. The irresistible, such a simple thing, signs of the presence of someone who cares for us. I know immediately when you offer me a brownie, you really like me. Do you like a brownie? Oh, thank you. In this case, the isolation was broken by these brownies. And then Jesus says to his disciples, "In my Father's house are many dwelling places." A phrase, sometimes the word mansions is used from the old King James Version. A phrase that most of us have heard at funerals, and a very comforting phrase, I think, for most people. But in the Greek, which the New Testament was originally written in, this dwelling place comes from a form of the word abide. There are many places to abide in my Father's house. You are abiding with my Father, with God, in other words. We hear a promise of constant abiding in God, constant abiding in Jesus. He makes it seem like a place, but the place is never ending. It has no boundaries or no walls or no windows, no door that must be entered or left from. We abide with God no matter what. The move to heaven is not done alone would be another way of thinking of it. I think so often when we find out that our days are numbered, and so often we fear death because it seems so lonely, an alone thing. And when you've heard of a loved one or a friend or even a stranger who's died and we say they died alone, there was no one with them, we find that to be particularly sad. And what Jesus is saying here is that no one dies alone. That God abides with them always. No one is apart from God. This promise that God gives, this constant abiding in Jesus, this fellowship of love and courage surrounding us, is to keep hope strong. The reason for it is to keep hope strong and the heart untroubled and courageous and creative. God expects our hearts and our minds to be creative in this world. Gives us the power to heal and forgive and inspire strength. And one of the great creative acts of God that is given to us is the possibility to be persistent, to never give up, to keep working on a problem, to continue to love, even when that love is rejected or forgotten or somehow trampled on. The untroubled heart is persistent. The nurse had it. I can't even imagine the courage and the creativity that would have to run through a person to go down into a dungeon to look at a child in a cage and to bring brownies.